All right, hello and welcome back. Brett here with clickmill.co. In this video, we're going to be talking about the root of insanity. And let's talk about that because, in any field, there's just so much information in the 20th, 21st century. We just have tons and tons of information, but it's very difficult to master a field with enough mastery, I guess, to actually know what it's saying because there's just so much information. So, with this, I want to go to psychology and counseling and talk about insanity. Okay. And I'm using the word insanity. I want you to understand this isn't like flippant or funny. Like I'm actually using the word insanity by definition to be insane. Okay. So let's go. And I'm going to quote Einstein first, and we're going to take this even deeper. Okay. So Einstein said that insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result. That's how he defined insanity. Now, what does that mean? Let's make it really, really simple. If I think 2 plus 2 is 5, and I do it over and over and over and over and over, and I always get 4, what should I probably do? Shift my expectation of what 2 plus 2 is. Why? And this is where we're going to push it a little bit further. Because sanity is the ability to ground my beliefs in my mind and in my heart on reality, which is what actually exists. If I just hard-headedly just continue unrelentingly to say, no, 2 plus 2 is 5. Well, why? It just is. I just know it. And all of the evidence over there says something different. You're a little insane because you're not grounding your beliefs on reality. Now, now let's go even a little bit deeper. Why is that so important? Why is it so important to ground our beliefs on reality? Because God created reality. God created the world. God created gravity. If you think that gravity does not affect you, you are not mentally sound in that particular area, that set of beliefs, because it obviously does. It's unquestionable. God made reality, and then God made our minds. And do you know what happens? And this is, if you watch the apologetics courses, this is one of the best arguments for God, and there's a lot of them, but this is my personal favorite. God made your mind to work in correlation with reality. For example, one facet of reality is relationships. People are naturally relational beings. And if you reject that part of reality and say, I don't need relationships, that person broke my heart. And so, all women are evil or all men are bad. Do you know what happens? You become bitter and angry and miserable your whole life. If you push people away, and again, none of this is to judge because I have done these things, I have pushed people away. I've done these things and you just end up miserable. And again, it's not judging or making fun because this is the natural thing you want to do to protect yourself. These are just coping mechanisms, but it's like, you're hurt and you want to push people away to protect yourself. What do you end up being? Lonely. That's not the way God designed you to work with reality. He designed you to be in relationship and have fulfilling relationship. And when you push people away, you become lonely. And as it turns out, studies have shown loneliness accesses and stimulates the same part of your brain as physical pain. It is the most painful emotion and one of the most painful experiences, even considering things like getting stabbed. It is painful on the level of serious physical pain. Why? Because we are basically relational creatures. So when we reject reality, it negatively affects who we are and who we become. And so the root of insanity is not properly grounding our mind in reality because God made our minds and reality to work together. And this is when you look at the strategy course and you look at sort of these foundational level courses with vision and all this stuff. It has to do with setting up a ministry, setting up your business, setting up your life in the way that God created reality and you to function within it. And an example of this is if God tells you, hey, I have a special purpose for you. You're going to get in that river over there and you're going to swim 1 mile. That is the call that I have for your life. I don't know if a mile's a lot or a little. It doesn't really matter. But if that's what he said, and you get in the river and you start trying to swim against the current, I can tell you, you're not going to go a mile. You're going to swim in the same place, maybe go backwards, depending on how strong that current is. And you're going to get tired and you're going to burn out and you're going to quit because it's too hard. And that's what so many people do. That's what insanity is. That's a little bit insane. I'm going to get in the river and I'm going to swim up the. No, you get in the river. God told you to go a mile. Get your floaties, get your noodle, your big foamy noodle, and get the big raft and just get on it and float down the river. It takes zero effort. So a lot of the things that are really, really hard, they're hard because we're actually fighting reality. We're expecting something different. And I love it in this book. And you should read it. There's some stuff in there I would caution you, like all of these books, to critical think. It's called The Road Less Traveled. I believe it's by M. Scott Peck. Such a good book. It will change your outlook on the world. It does have some Christian themes, but I believe it's a secular book. And the beginning of the book basically starts out by saying, life is hard and then you die. And, life has some great stuff. That is not to discount all of the wonderful blessings that God has, but you have to recognize that there's going to be struggle. And if you go through life expecting it to be easy, this is another quote from another book, and I don't remember which one is. If you expect life to be awful easy, your life will be awfully hard. If you expect life to be awfully hard, your life will be awfully easy. And that's kind of what the beginning of The Road Less Traveled says. It's, listen, there's nothing new under the sun. That's Ecclesiastes. The sun comes up, the sun comes down. Hard things happen. Everybody goes through hard things. And shockingly, we all think we're I can't believe my life is so hard in this way. No, that's been going on for thousands of years since the fall. So many people have had that same thing. It doesn't matter what it is. It's not to diminish the severity of that hard thing. And there are hard things that are harder than other things, but it doesn't matter what the hard thing is. Someone else has gone through it. You are not alone. You are not the only person who's had that happen. And once you realize you're not unique, your problems aren't unique, and everybody goes through that, and you should just expect hard things to come, you can suddenly be like, oh, you can reset your expectations for reality. And that's what the beginning of that book is saying. You're not unique. Everybody has hard things. Expect life to be hard, and it's going to be really easy. Once you just accept reality for what it is, right? Once we, what did I say Einstein said insanity was? Expecting doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result. How about we stop going through life expecting it to be easy and pleasurable? We're not skipping through the open meadow. No, it's going to be tough. Once we accept it, we realize there are going to be some really hard points here, and I'm okay with that. And you make your peace with that, and you say, you know what? I'm going to get through it, and I'm probably going to be bruised. There's going to be blood, sweat, and tears. I'm going to fall down, and if I have to claw my way out, then I'll claw, whatever it is, then we'll do it. And, when I meet Jesus on the other side, I will be able to honestly say, I did not quit no matter what. I ran the race with perseverance. That's what I want to be able to say. So, what is that worth? What happens if the business fails? What happens if, my wife and I don't get to adopt these foster kids? What happens if there's death? What happens if I'm terribly hurt or my wife is terribly hurt? Is that going to be the thing that breaks my spirit? No, it can't be. And this is why I say in this course, we're talking about some fairly dark things. These are dark things, but it's also reality. There's darkness in reality. The world is fallen. It's got some evil and it's got some good, but it's got some evil. We have to make our peace with the evil. And so the root of insanity is rejecting reality. Even right now, it's like, I don't like talking about this stuff. It's like, and I'm even thinking to myself internally, it's like, man, are people really going to sit around and listen to me talk about this negative stuff? Because I don't want to talk about it, because I don't want to think about that part of the world because it's the really hard part, except I can't reject it. If I'm going to be the person who's going to get through the hardest stuff, I'm going to be the person that has to look at it. I have to look at the scary thing. I have to look at the hard thing. And I have to say, if that happened, am I 100% committed to getting through it? And the answer has to be yes. And so we want to ground our expectations in reality. Otherwise, we're insane. And I mean that technically, and it doesn't mean we're absolutely crazy, but also these are the types of things that will break us. And I want to give you an example from my own life. As some of you may know, I had a camper van business for a while where we took these big vans and we would gut the back and put a bed and a sink and a table and like Wi-Fi and really cool. And we'd rent them out to tourists in Hawaii. And the first one I built, I had a friend who had them. He had some like small, like mom van, like Toyota Siennas. And he just stuck a back and a sink, and they're real small. And I was like, well, I want a bigger one. I don't want a small one. I can make more money if I made a bigger one. So I got a bigger van. And I was like, yeah, I got this. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. And God's blessing. And it's very clear that was the direction God had for me at the time. And I get in and I start going, and I realized I don't know anything about building anything. I hadn't touched a hammer since I was in like the 9th grade. And I went for like 4 months. I thought for sure I'd have it done in 2 or 3 months, because like, how hard could it be? It took me like 8 months to finish my first build. And halfway through, I hit this hard depression. It was like, oh, I'm never going to make it. I'm never going to get through it. It's never going to be done. I spent a whole day trying to put one screw into metal and could not figure out why I couldn't get it to work. I went to the hardware store. I talked to the guy and I'm like, I can't get this screw into metal. He's like, oh, you need these screws. They're called self-tapping screws. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Went back to the van. I spent a whole nother day trying to get the one. And there's like hundreds and hundreds of screws in these things. You know, you're building a house. Spent an entire another day trying to get a screw into the metal. And I go back, find the same guy at the Home Depot. And I'm like, you gave me this screw. It doesn't work. And he's like, what are you talking about? They work fine. And it's like, it didn't go in. And he's like, well, what are you using? And he's like, I'm like, I'm using a drill. What else would you use? And he's like, oh, you can't use a drill. You can't use a drill for a screw. He's like, no, you have to have a special tool to put it into metal. And I'm like, okay, what's that? And he takes me over to a thing. And you know what it looks like? A drill. And I'm like, I have a drill. And he's like, no, no, no. This is an impact driver. Just buy it. Trust me, it'll work. And I'm like, okay. And I buy it and I go, and it immediately just puts it right into the metal. So I was like, I didn't know anything. And I was so discouraged. I thought I would never get there. And I just spent like 2 or 3 weeks just wallowing in self-pity, you know? And finally, I'm like, okay, you know what? I just got to go and get this done. Because every day this isn't done is another day. It's not on the road. It's not making a profit. I'm not providing for my family and all this stuff. And finally, I get around and I'm like, all right, let's do this. Let's get it done. Then we got it done. Why did I have such a hard time getting through that? And I'm telling you, I spent a couple weeks, probably 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, just feeling so discouraged and depressed, essentially, and defeated that I could not bring, I wanted to go do it, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I was so burnt out. I was so exhausted on this thing. Why? Because my expectations of reality was not accurate. I started the journey with an insane belief. It wasn't grounded in reality. I thought it was going to take me 2 months. I was 4 months in and I was exhausted. Why? Because I planned my resources for 2 months. I was working like 10, 12 hours a day building these things for 2 months, having no idea what I was doing. I was learning this off YouTube. And I got to the end of my rope and I didn't plan to go longer than 2 months. And what did I do? I pushed and I grit and I grinded, did 2 more months. And that was the end. I was done. Okay. Now that's not really my fault because I didn't know how long it would take. I had no idea. Well, sometimes you're just going to hit the edge. And then what happened during the time when I was kind of like feeling really discouraged, really depressed? It was like, okay, this is clearly way harder than I thought it was. And this was kind of like my wife building me up. It's like, this is way harder than you thought it was. But what are you going to do? Like, are you just going to quit? You've got a half-built rental vehicle out there. You can't quit. Like, you just have to be okay with, she's giving me the pep talk. And that's great. Thank goodness that she did, right? And I went out and I got it done and we put this thing on the road and then we built two more. We had a set of three of these things on the road. But you know what? I didn't get the second van or the third van. I didn't get the discouragement because I knew going in what reality was. Oh, this is not a 1 month thing. And I was able to do the second van because I increased my skill and I accepted reality. I was able to do that one in like 4 months as opposed to like 8 months on the second one. So I cut it in half. The third one, I trained someone to help me and helped him start his own business. And in exchange for me coaching him, he helped me build the second one. And we did it in like 16 hours. We did it so fast because, and I'm only able to speed it up and I'm only able to do better because I accepted reality for what it was. But the first time I was insane. I thought it was different than it was. I thought I had a skill I didn't have. I thought it was going to be faster, and that was all wrong. And I could only continue when I reset my beliefs to what was actually real. And this is really literally, in many cases, the root of mental illness, right? They say, oh, you're mentally ill, you're depressed, you're anxious, and all this stuff. Many times, and this is certainly not always the case, it is because you are expecting reality to be easier than it is. Right? Anxiety is a fear of what could happen in the future. Now, a lot of times people with anxiety are just making, like C.S. Lewis says, I've seen many woes in my life. I've experienced so many terrible things in my life, most of which never existed, right? That's C.S. Lewis. Well, what does that mean? He's thinking about all the terrible things that could happen in the future, and the likelihood that that's going to happen is like not really that much. So sometimes anxiety isn't really grounded in reality because those aren't real fears. But, if there's like COVID going around and you're like, oh my gosh, what if I get COVID? You should make your peace with it because you'll probably get COVID. Like, the likelihood of that is really high. And you're going to have to take it on because what? You can't dodge it. If it's coming for you, it's coming for you. So, we have to make peace with reality. And this is another way that we can gird up our loins. I don't know. We can shore up our defenses against reality and against the enemy. The enemy wants to attack you in the place that you cannot expect it, that will discourage you the most. And so it's like, am I going to, you start seeing things on the horizon up there and it's like, off up in the future. And it's like, well, what if that happens? How would I respond? What's the worst case scenario? Am I okay to do that? When I start a business, what's the worst case scenario? Let's say I put in, $10,000 or $20,000 or $50,000, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Am I willing to put that money in and completely lose it? Will that sink the ship? Will I not be able to recover from that? Because if I can't, then don't do that. The answer always needs to be, I'm going to make it through, and here's how. All right. So all of that wrapping back around, the root of insanity is a false belief about reality. So you need to figure out where reality is. And that's not always clear. Like I told you with the vans, I didn't know where it was. I found it when I smacked my head right into it and realized I was just like, oh my gosh, this is not what I thought it was. You have to figure out where reality is, and then you have to make your peace with it. And a lot of times, not all the time, sometimes reality is great. But we have to be the type of people who look at it, accept it for what it is, understand that there are going to be hard things, and be okay with it, and just be the person who's willing to do the hard thing. And then you're unstoppable. Once you accept that, you expect life to be really hard, suddenly it gets really easy because you're just like, well, yeah, I was just expecting that. I'm just okay with that. So everybody else is panicking, and you're like, yeah, this stinks. I don't like it, but I'm okay with it. I've made my peace with it. I can have peace in the midst of the storm. All right, so in this video, we're talking about the root of insanity, why people really break down and really have mental and emotional distress amidst difficulty. And it's because we actually have beliefs that are not grounded in reality. And we haven't accepted reality for what it was. Now we're going to continue, and we're going to talk about failure in the next video. Boy, do we have a fear of failure. We need to have some beliefs on failure that are actually accurate. So I want to talk to you about that there. God bless.